The landscape along Colorado's Front Range is dotted with fracking sites. Weld County, Colorado, which taps into the Niobrara Shale, has more than 2,300 active wells and, as of 2015, produced 90% of the crude oil pulled out of the ground in the state. Fracking, or hydraulic fracking, is an oil and gas extraction process that works by using high pressure to inject liquid, sand, and chemicals into shale formations to fracture the rock, making the oil and gas accessible. It is a controversial practice. Proponents argue it is a safe and effective way to get at oil and gas reserves, while opponents say that the chemicals used in fracking aren't regulated and that fracking can contaminate groundwater and the land. Because fracking is controversial and complex, and because it is increasingly prevalent not only in Colorado, but in the 34 states across the U.S., this study is using fracking as a subject for a series of stories produced in various immersive formats to explore whether and how immersive storytelling can impact the connection an audience member has to the subject, as well as the level of concern or care that the audience member will have regarding fracking. Hybridity, or blending two unlike traditions, offers non-traditional approaches to nonfiction storytelling. This study is focused on immersive platforms for journalistic storytelling that would be accessible to local and regional newsrooms, so platforms that don't require large budgets to access or a significant amount of time or for training before a journalist can use them. For this project, we developed a story across 3 app-based platforms: virtual reality, augmented reality, and interactive documentary, or IDoc, and used focus groups who were exposed to one or more of the storytelling formats to determine user satisfaction and storytelling effectiveness. We argue that while mass-produced apps offer an entry point into experimentations in immersive and mixed reality storytelling, platform robustness and full experimentation may be lost. This project is grounded in the philosophical underpinnings of interactive documentary, or IDoc, a form that uses digital technology to encourage user participation. We are concerned, drawing from Aston's et al., not what documentary means, but what documentary does, considering how users interact with and gain knowledge from immersive technologies, including VR, AR, and interactive documentaries, collectively known as mixed reality or MR. Despite the increasing use of these formats, such as experiments with publications including the Canadian Broadcast Corporation or the New York Times, there is little research into the efficacy of MR as a journalistic storytelling platform. Most IDoc empirical research focuses on questions of empathy or sympathy with another person's life, as created by an in-their-shoes experience. Stories are crafted around individuals, and the goal typically is to help the audience member connect with the individual on an emotional level. Here we want to extend the inquiry from empathy with another person to whether immersive technologies can engender an ethic of care around an issue of public concern, one that impacts a broader community or society at large. Borrowing on Carol Gilligan's concept of moral psychology, an ethic of care recognizes the connections between individuals and is separated politically or psychologically from a realm of individual autonomy and freedom, which is the realm of justice and contractual obligation. Gilligan's work, which developed out of and built on and challenged Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development, takes a feminist approach to moral development. Initially, she writes, in a pre-conventional stage, moral development is self-focused and is centered on the person's need to survive. At this stage, people will choose their own needs over the needs of others when in conflict between the needs of the self and the needs of the others arise. At the next stage, which is referred to as the conventional morality, moral judgment focused more on caring for others, even to the point of self-sacrifice. Her work contrasts to Kohlberg's focus on an ethics of justice by arguing that a feminist ethics of care puts issues that had been viewed as relational ones, such as domestic abuse or childcare, into the political realm. Joan Tronto, writing on an ethic of care in 2005, tried to clarify the concept and tie it more explicitly to human goodness and naturalness. In the latter term, Tronto was focused on gender roles and the fact that care is too often socially constructed as a woman's role. But the idea of naturalness can be extended in this research to include nature and the environment itself, which often is linked to gendered ideas, most notably the idea of Mother Nature. Tronto's work identifies 5 attributes that define care: attentiveness, responsibility, competence, responsiveness, and solidarity, or the ability for people to take collective responsibility and to take the needs of society more seriously. For this research, we are examining whether the ethic of care extends to the relationship of humans to the environment and whether immersive forms of storytelling about the environment can enhance the ethic of care. Applying this to MR, we seek to understand whether the IDOC or AR or VR can provide a stronger connection to the subject of the story, particularly when the story is about an issue that is more complex and more contentious. The project is based on the oral histories of 2 female photographers who photographed the same farm in western North Dakota that was impacted by fracking, specifically the brine runoff and discarded fracking water. We also interviewed a lead advisor for the National Science Foundation, funded by Project Air, Water, Gas. Based on those interviews and additional reporting, we created a story about fracking, one using VR, one using AR, and one online. For each platform, the story contained the same information, which was accessible to the user in ways appropriate to the format. Each format has up to 10 short pieces for participants to view or interact with. The IDOC used all 10 of the short pieces to its story, and users could access new information as they moved through and clicked on earlier story elements. It was built using the Content Management System, or Contour, the framework behind the award-winning IDOCs such as Prison Valley and Fort McMoney. The MR platforms were location-specific, using tables and walls as spaces where the user could find videos, graphics, and photographs. In the AR format, the story allowed the user to digitally place a life-size drilling rig into their own space. It was built using AR Core. In VR, users could wander through 4 different locations, each containing specific video elements. We made sure in VR to make use of the tactile nature of the program, so users could pick up photographs and turn them over to get more information. Users also were able to teleport to parts of the drilling platform. It was built using Unreal Engine 4. Each experience took approximately 15 minutes to fully complete. For all 3 stories, the voices and the concerns of the women who took the photographs were available in audio feeds. The stories were designed as non-linear. Users could watch as much or as little as they liked. To assess the impact of each story format, we conducted focus group discussions, recruiting participants from Longmont, Colorado, a community of just under 100,000 people that is surrounded by fracking sites. We chose this community because it is more economically and politically diverse, with a higher proportion of blue-collar workers than nearby Boulder, Colorado, and more of them either work in oil and the gas industry or are related to or know someone who does. We recruited for the focus groups through social media and the online neighborhood bulletin boards, including Nextdoor and Craigslist. Participants were paid $50 either in cash or an Amazon gift card for their participation. We had 4 different focus groups ranging in size from 6 to 8 participants, with 26 participants total. 3 of the groups experienced the story in just one of the 3 formats, and 1 group interacted with all 3 formats. Prior to interacting with the immersive media stories, participants filled out questionnaires asking about their media use, any prior experience with immersive storytelling, and their attitudes about fracking and the environmental risk. After their immersive storytelling experience and before the focus group's discussion started, they filled out a second questionnaire asking about their experience with the storytelling formats and again asking questions about their opinions on fracking and the environment. Through this, we were looking for any changes, even subtle ones, between the participants' pre-test and post-test environmental attitudes. After completing the second questionnaire, the participants took part in a focus group discussion about what they learned from the story and whether they believed the technology enhanced the story or detracted from it. The focus group discussions were recorded and transcribed and then analyzed for to discover key themes. Those themes were then used to conduct a second analysis of the focus group transcriptions to test for the validity of the themes and to explore for any additional insights. In looking at the participants' experience with the immersive storytelling itself, only a handful of the participants had prior experience with any iDocs, augmented reality, or virtual reality storytelling. 4 of the participants reported prior experience with VR formats, and 2 reported prior experience with iDocs or 360-degree video. None reported any experience with augmented reality, though one person did appear to confuse that with video game applications. Thus, the users in our focus groups largely weren't familiar with the technologies, nor how they might be used in journalistic storytelling. The experience of immersive storytelling was enjoyable for most of the participants, but also confusing. One woman in her 20s, who was in the iDoc group, said she started scrolling around the story but wasn't sure what she was looking for, and that, quote, took a minute to find the 360 globe, end quote. From there, she said she started, quote, she started at the top and then read the descriptions and followed through, going left to right and top to bottom, end quote. She liked that she could choose what stories within the format she wanted to see, but also said that the non-linear format was distracting. Another woman in her 20s also found the VR format intriguing, but the experience itself more disjointed in terms of the storytelling. Quote, it's an issue that I care a lot about. I feel like, going through some of the information was nice because it just gave me more information about the topic. I like some perspectives that were offered, but it was just like I just wanted to just sit down and listen to that, end quote. Others in the VR group concurred, saying that while they learned more about fracking and its impacts through storytelling experience, the story itself was hard to follow. They valued the information they got about the culture of North Dakota, where the filming was done, and they appreciated hearing the voices and the stories of the 2 women photographers who took the images that could be examined in the VR story. One woman said she liked being able to move through the various elements of the VR story at her own pace and the ability to, quote, choose what I wanted to do, end quote. And as a woman in her 60s said that she liked the concept and the possibilities of it, but she was less enamored with the VR overall as a way of learning about the subject. One consistent comment from the participants across the focus groups was that they wanted a common starting point. The experience of being dropped into the story and having to find a place to start was disconcerting, particularly in the AR format. One participant, a man in his 40s, added that he was frustrated by the fact that he didn't know when the story was over since there was no clear conclusion either. Added a woman in her 60s, quote, I was reminded of going to a museum where you can get, that tour. And I think that's really fun and useful way to go through it, but it wasn't like a story though, end quote. Others who experienced the AR story said that having the fracking site dropped into their space made the sense of it more tangible, which one participant said made the impact of it more effective. He also said that it was especially effective to use AR at the actual fracking site in North Dakota, since that might trigger someone to think of other elements of culture and setting. A young woman in the same group who said she had, quote, some prior interest, end quote, in the topic, said that the audio portion of the storytelling made her want to learn more about fracking and its impacts. But to learn more, she probably turned to text-based stories, adding, quote, I'm more into reading because it's really easy to consume text, end quote. In other groups, the participants reported similar experiences. The immersive story, whether iDoc, VR, or AR, was much more interactive and interesting than a traditional story format, and participants said they liked that they could choose where they wanted to go or what they wanted to experience in the immersive story format. Still, regardless of the format, participants said it didn't feel like they were being told a story. And for those in the AR and VR conditions, participants said they were distracted by the technology itself and by feeling unsure in their real-world environment as a result of being focused on the technology. Additionally, the play aspects of AR and VR conditions seem to contribute to a lack of engagement with the information being shared in the stories. One man in his 30s, who was in the VR group, said he enjoyed the experience, but he didn't learn much from it because he was intrigued by how he could interact with the objects in the VR space using the robotic hands that he could control. So for him, the photos, which had more information about fracking and what was going on in the image in the back, if you flip them over, became a toy. Quote, I didn't even read the cards. I picked them up and was just too excited to focus on reading them, so I threw them because, they were just like a frisbee. So what I did was actually flip it, and then saw the text, and in my excitement, I want to see the other one, but I batted the other card out, so sometimes the content was a bit distracting, end quote. Still, despite the distraction and his tendency to play with the photos, he said he learned a little bit about fracking. Another man in his 60s followed up by saying he thinks that VR would be a good way to get someone interested in a subject such as fracking, even if it's not an effective way to convey very much information about it. Another participant, a man in his mid-20s who described himself as an avid video game player, said that he liked being able to walk around the fracking site, but that there was too much information for the format. Quote, and I don't like also the storytelling aspect of it, because if you were writing a story, what you want to start off with is an anchor, right? End quote. From there, he said the story should introduce a character, one of the photographers, for example, and then have a person talk, and then discuss fracking and the mechanics of it, and then balance that with the value of fracking to the community. Essentially, as he talked, he described preference for linear narrative in the immersive medium, as did most of his participants. The interactive features made the story more fun, but for a complex issue like fracking, they wanted more linear format as a base so they could be enhanced with non-linear and immersive story formats. To explore the question whether immersive storytelling can increase how much a person connects to or cares about a topic, answers to a series of questions related to environmental attitudes were compared to the pre-test and post-test questionnaires. The results indicate that some increase in caring about the issue through immersive storytelling. Environmental attitudes were measured on both sides of the pre-test and post-test questionnaires by asking participants to use a 10-point scale, with 1 being disagree completely and 10 being agree completely, to a series of statements about fracking. Some of the statements indicated a positive attitude toward fracking at the lower end of the scale, and others indicated a negative attitude at the lower end of the scale to avoid issues of response set bias. The statements with negative attitude toward fracking at the low end were recoded and reversed after the fact so that the higher numbers of the questions overall corresponded with a pro-environmental and anti-fracking set of attitudes. 2 participants were excluded from this part of the analysis. 1 person who filled out a post-test questionnaire but had not yet filled out the pre-test questionnaire, and 1 who didn't completely fill out the post-test questionnaire. Among those who did complete both the pre-test and the post-test questionnaires, there were several who came in with strong opinions about fracking and who filled out their pre-test questionnaires with either 1s or 10s on all of the questions about the topic. Not surprisingly, for these participants, the immersive storytelling had a little to no impact, given that they were measuring the information against a strong existing set of beliefs. So while they were interested in the subject matter, they were not open to the information that might have changed or challenged their current beliefs. However, among those with less knowledge about fracking and less established perspectives, there was some measurable impact of the immersive storytelling formats. Among participants who saw only one of the 3 story formats, the ones of the AR group had the biggest overall gain in their concern for the environment. This group showed an average positive net gain ranging from 0.2 on the 10-point scale on the statement, quote, we need to consider alternatives to fracking in order to preserve our environment, end quote, to 2.4 on, quote, although fracking is an economical source of oil and gas, we cannot risk the environmental impacts, end quote. The VR group had a net gain of 1.3 on the latter statement, and the IDOC group had a net gain of 0.7 on it. A gain in environmental care also surfaced on the statement, quote, oil and gas extraction can't be done safely through hydraulic fracturing or fracking, end quote. On this statement, the large gain was in the VR group, which showed an increase overall in ethic of care by 1.25. Among the IDOT group, There was an increase of 1 on the statement saying that fracking isn't safe, and among the AR group, the increase was 0.4 on that statement. The only other statement to show consistent gains in environmental care attitudes across the 3 groups was one that said, quote, "We need to consider alternatives to fracking in order to preserve our environment," end quote. On this statement, the VR group showed the largest gain, increasing its care level by 1, while the IDOT group had a net gain of 0.7, and the AR group had a net gain of 0.2. On the other 9 statements, the results were more mixed. And on 2, one which read, quote, "I am concerned that fracking will contaminate my water sources," end quote, and another that read, quote, "I do not believe that fracking will trigger earthquakes," end quote. Focus groups participants reported a more positive attitude about fracking after their immersive storytelling experience. The group that saw all 3 formats of the story shows gains in an ethic of care across nearly every statement. They had evidence of strong environmental care gains on statements saying that fracking could not be done safely, that fracking is not a good way to access oil and gas, that the economic gains from fracking are not worth the risks, and that fracking risks triggered earthquakes. For this group, the only statement to indicate a decline in the ethic of care about the environment was the one that said, quote, "The risks of fracking are minimal and are offset by the gains from the economic oil and gas extraction," end quote. The net loss in environmental care attitude on this statement was negative 0.25 on the 10-point scale. The overall net positive gain in the pro-environmental attitude for this group may be a result of their ability to interact with the information through 3 different storytelling methods. So the repetition of the information and the fact that they heard the voices of the photographers several times may have led to greater connection to the story itself. This preliminary study indicates that immersive storytelling can lead to increased care about a subject, even for a story that is focused on the broader social and environmental impacts of something like fracking. While immersive storytelling already is being used effectively to let audiences experience something they might not yet otherwise be able to, whether it's speed skating in the Olympics, which the New York Times did in 2018, or life in a prison cell, which The Guardian did in 2016 with 6x9, a virtual experience of solitary confinement. This study shows that it may be useful in telling more complex stories that don't focus on a singular person or experience. The research also shows that the connection can be established through immersive storytelling may engender a greater ethic of care among audience members on stories about social, society, and environmental issues. Still, there are cautions. Audience members can find immersive storytelling confusing, and the participants in this study expressed a clear preference for some linearity so they knew where to start and when the story was over. This means that media producers and journalists need to provide clear roadmaps through nonlinear story formats that they may want to consider adding gamification elements, scoring points, competing with others, and having rules to guide the audience member to an immersive storytelling experience to increase engagement and keep audiences focused on the information that the story is trying to convey.